It's a beautiful day for a Goadkicker, a beautiful day for a podcast. Won't you be mine? Won't you be mine? Gonna put on my hoodie and my harm reduction Bass Pro Cap. Could you be mine? Won't you be my Goadkickers? Hey, everybody. A week late with these topics, but the last one went so long. Now I'm at full power, just like Mr. Rogers. Check that out. Now I know why he does that. Hubris is why. So, welcome back to the Goadkicker podcast. I am your host, Carl D. Smith. The D stands for detention, and that's where I'm going to end up for neglecting to get this thing started on time. I actually almost forgot that today was Wednesday, and that meant it's Goadkicker night. And then I got watching sumo wrestling, which is my new obsession, and completely spaced again that I needed to start at 8:30. So I'm going to try not to talk about sumo, you guys, but I am absolutely sprung for sumo wrestling right now. So it is my new jam. And will I be interested in sumo wrestling a year from now? Those of you who follow me or follow the Goadkicker know that the odds are pretty good that I won't talk about sumo wrestling by June of this year. But I've decided to embrace that side of me. And man, if I'm into it now and I'm going to throw myself into it deep, I'm just going to enjoy it and not feel guilty about that. It's you only get one shot at life, and my curiosity and my wandering interests are somewhat famous, almost as famous as how often I quit Facebook and restart it. But it's just part of who I am, and at 48, I've got to start to be a little more comfortable with that. And so, we Goadkick. Glad to have you back here on the Cornucopia 7. Is that what we're calling it? In low geosynchronous orbit, right above Council Bluffs, Iowa, planet Earth. On this third episode, I want to talk about a couple things. Of course, we got to mix the sweet with the salty. We got to mix the intelligent with the irrelevant, however you want to put that. And I want to talk a little bit about adult success, because it's something that I think all of us chase to one degree or another, but maybe don't find. And a lot of your life is defined by how, I don't know, how well or how not well you find that success, or how you compare to others who have found success, at least in your eyes. And how toxic that can be. Because again, it's so trite and so hack to say it, but man, it's like every day is kind of a gift, and we spend so many of them miserable, just needlessly miserable. And some of that's by design, and some of that is proof that we need to treat ourselves maybe a little bit better. So we'll talk a little bit about success here in just a moment. So some housekeeping. There isn't a Goadkicker podcast without me and employment drama, right? So every time this show seems to get in its stride again, there's a big job change or something goes on with my employment, and kind of upsets the apple cart a little bit. And I was thinking about that today. I set up an interview for yet another job, which could potentially, if offered to me, put me in a position for much angst in deciding whether or not to take it. But we'll talk about that when it happens. But I was thinking about how my show, my creative projects, my writing, my posting online, all of those things always seem to butt up against some sort of vocational drama. And I was wondering, is there a reason for that? Is that stress? Is that that feeling of helplessness, and in that crushing weight of making a decision that may affect not only your future, but the future of your family and your financial well-being and the state of your hobbies and your sleeping schedule and all those things. Does that stress somehow need additional creativity? Creativity then so you can blow off some steam and be productive and make content? Or is it that making content in the way that I do, with things that I hope are thought provoking, at least to me, they're thought provoking? Maybe you've spent a little bit of time thinking, maybe too much time, and you start to question things like the static parts of your life, like your career. And maybe me being productive at my creative endeavors actually encourages me to second guess things what I'm not so creative in, such as punching a clock. So maybe it's a chicken and egg situation. Does the podcast give me problems with the job, or does the problems with the job give me the podcast? Or there's a third option. I'll let you think briefly about that third option. The third option is my life is so filled with drama. Let's just call it drama. That me finding a time when I have vocational drama is like, shooting fish in a barrel. And so any endeavor that I undertake is going to butt up against some period of time when I'm dealing with some sort of vocational stress, because I'm constantly in a state of vocational stress. I would like to say all of us are, but I look around me and I see a lot of people who, are able to mitigate some of the soul crushing aspects of the 9 to 5 and seem to live, at least on the surface, reasonably happy lives. And I always wondered why I was so restless. My friend Jerry, one of my good friends, I can tell he's a good friend because he's not afraid to say things to me that that might be constructive criticism. And he mentioned that, I tend to have a particular attitude where I struggle with having management. And that seems to be a running theme. And initially I disagreed, but, it's true. I don't like to be managed because I like to follow my own pursuits. I'm a productive guy. I can be a hardworking guy. And I like what I do to have some sort of meaning outside of just churning out pointless labor. And so it puts me in a position where being my own boss would probably put out those fires, but also I'm not disciplined enough or organized enough to risk my entire livelihood and the livelihood of my family on me taking on some sort of self-employed projects. So there is that. That's that constructive criticism. Also, I think that we all value things differently. When I see other full-time pharmacists, when I was in pharmacy, hey, how's it going? I got a compliment on the chat box here, and now I'm all flustered and gonna derail the whole show. But when I see other people in that role, I wonder how they're able to punch in and punch out. They're frustrated with the game the same way I was. The same reasons. They're not doing anything any more or less antagonistic to management or to the customers than I am, and so we're all having that same experience. And I wonder how come they're able to do it for 12 years, and I get to about the 2-year mark and I have a rash, and I've got to get out of there because I couldn't take another day. I need a change of venue at least. And I wonder why it is that they're like that and I'm the way I am. And it's not a good or a bad thing. It's not a better than, worse than thing. It's a matter of I think that my values of my own time and my expectations of what I do with my energy and my effort are so different that I get super frustrated easy when I'm just spinning my wheels and just doing things just because, or when there's a lack of appreciation or a lack of an effort to reach out to people who could probably really use some intervention and use an advocate. Much like we talked about with harm reduction, I think all healthcare should serve a purpose similar to a religious mission, and that is to bring this wealth of resource that we have access to serve those who don't have access. Uh, hey, how's it going, man? Actually, that reminds me of something. I should probably call you guys by your screen names rather than try to out you to the world here. But to swim the birds reminds me of something else I want to mention here on, and I'll wrap up this intro part. So anyway, I think that's the difference. I think my values of my own time and my own expectations of what I accomplish are different than other people. And some people are really good at compartmentalizing and just punching that clock, and that's not bad. It's not worse or better, like I said. It's a very useful survival mechanism. But for myself, I think I struggle with that. I need to do something that's creative and productive, and at least something that can distract my intellectual pursuits and my curiosity until it doesn't, and then I move on. And IT has been an amazing boon for me because it's the sort of job that rewards you for having that wanderlust to constantly learn new things and apply new things. I think that there are corners of the IT world that could get incredibly stale and repetitive, or you could look at it as a challenge and continually rebuild and refocus. Whereas a retail pharmacist, the best you can do is go work for the guy across the street and sometimes even deal with the same patients. So anyway, dealing with a little bit of career choices, but that's always been the case with Goadkicker. And, that's just who I am, I guess. So what Swim the Birds reminded me I wanted to mention is I haven't followed as a viewer the WWE, WWF for a long time. And I was turned off by the Attitude Era even when it was happening. Although I watched WCW and it wasn't much better, so I don't know why I chose sides at that time. But the more I find out about what went on and what was getting their ratings and what the fans fondly remember from that era, I'm not interested in it. The pro wrestling that I enjoy, for the most part, is dead and gone, and I'm fine with that. It saves me a lot of time and energy, but I still kind of keep my ear to the tracks and try to follow what's going on. And I do want to see some good wrestling every once in a while. So I either find myself watching very, very old wrestling on YouTube, or I'll dip into something like AEW and just tune out the stuff I don't like as much and enjoy the stuff that I do. And there's some personalities I think that in the right era and the right guidance would have been outstanding superstars of pro wrestling, and there's some that I'm amazed that that's who they're hitching their wagon to. But where I was going with this is the WWE is going through a massive, massive, massive problem right now, where they have some leadership issues with Vince retiring and coming back, and people voluntarily retiring or being forced out of seats. And then the rumored sale now of the WWE to an investment group from Saudi Arabia, which, there was a lot of speculation. Who's going to buy the WWE as an intellectual property? Is it going to be NBC? Is it going to be Disney? Is it going to be some dark horse like Netflix or Amazon? And it turns out that all of those places were very wise and realized that the valuation on that company doesn't really have a lot of return on it. And for some reason, the only people with the kind of money to throw around and buy stuff up is Saudi Arabia. And given their human rights violations and some of their cultural, their cultural components, let's call them, the things that they make into issues that wouldn't allow them to just put on a wrestling show as you and I know it, uh, make this a sticky situation. There's just so much at play, whether it be ethical or social or religious. Um, there's just so much stuff, and wrestling already struggles to get above certain allegations of being a boys' club and exploitive uh, and exclusionary. With who gets promoted and pushed. Um, I don't think a Saudi Arabia, board is going to help alleviate any of those problems. So it could be, and it's a little bit the sky is falling, but it could be that we could finally be seeing the end of this worldwide wrestling federation lineage. No McMahon's involved is what it kind of seems like is going to happen. And what do you own? What do you own if you buy the WWE? You buy a logo, you buy brand recognition that means that it's going to be wrestling. But you may own a bunch of trademarks, but a lot of those trademarks are tied to actual human beings that are no longer involved. So you might own the Undertaker, you might own the Ultimate Warrior, you might own the Macho Man, but those are things that no longer exist. And other than back catalogs of tapes, I don't know how you hope to recoup any money you invest. The WWE isn't really a touring troupe anymore. Wrestling isn't really in that mode anymore. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, then there was a huge interest and swell in independent wrestling and some resource sharing between some of the promotions. The AEW was very progressive about highlighting non-contracted independent wrestlers and even hiring some of them. Wrestling was going to enter a new era, it looked like, for a while there. But now it'll be interesting to see what happens. A lot of that buzz around some of the lesser promotions has just gone away or has been cannibalized. I don't know. It's interesting only in that it's a change of the guard. And it could very well be that the AEW comes out on top and might have an embarrassment of riches of resources to pull from, both from fans and viewers and from wrestlers, from talent to pull from, depending on what people's opinion and what their contracts are like after this sale. And they may have to grow up quick, or they may suffer the same problem that any business does when it grows too quickly and, pull a WCW and just have every advantage in the world and still find a way to lose. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'm not against AEW. I'd like to see them do well. I think there's some idiots in charge there, but at the end of the day, I'm a fan, and I'm sitting and I'm watching a product, and the product is usually pretty entertaining, and there's usually at least one excellent match, on their free show. There are no jobbers, so to speak. They run out all their talent every week, and I don't know what I think about that in the grand scheme of pro wrestling, but for this day and age, it's an exciting product. And I think they would have a lot to offer from people fleeing a sinking ship. And I hope everybody acts with their heart and not with their pocketbook, but more power to them to try to benefit from this situation, because Lord knows that the WWE has benefited from, in their case, plenty of times. So anyway, so wrestling is going through quite a big change, and it'll be interesting to see where it ends up. So, well, I want to talk a little bit about success and what it means to find success as an adult. And it's one of those things where you define success and then you chase success, or you define success and you find it impossible to approach success and then you give up. And then there's people in between who are really good at reassessing success, which is hard to say, and constantly have like a moving target, and have a very stepwise, methodical way of going about finding that sort of that inner accomplishment as an adult. Most of my friends, the sort of people who listen to this podcast, aren't going to be the type of people who fell backwards into a trust fund and don't have to worry about success. They just have to worry about being. Most of us had to find some way to afford rent, hobbies, and so on. A lot of us in this sort of middle class, if you would call it that, define success on relationships. Finding that love of your life, or finding that circle of friends, or finding a hobby that they can really throw themselves into and sort of become a part of a fandom. Having children, or having pets, or producing content. Those are all achievable common successes. And some people, they sort of made their list and that was on the list. And if they achieve it, they're satisfied and they're done. And I don't want to equate having a podcast with having a child as far as generating content, but here we are. The problem with that is there's people who set those goals for themselves and don't reach those goals and feel like a failure. You don't find the love of your life, or you can't finish that novel, or COVID absolutely rips apart your social group and it never congeals again. Or, there's a lot of focus, especially in like the comic book community, of finding your people, finding your tribe. Well, what happens when you find your tribe and then things that are out of your control take that tribe from you? Like, I don't know, a certain bird-based social media app slowly deteriorating over the course of, 6 years until a switch in ownership absolutely puts the pin in it, So then what happens? What do you do as, in my case, a 48-year-old who has had opportunities to get educations and to find employment and to make relationships, but you don't feel like you're a success? Do you continue to chase success? Do you just kind of change your targets so that you can give yourself a participation ribbon and excuse yourself from the rat race for whatever life you have left ahead of you? It's a difficult thing because sometimes you do everything right and just never get that lightning bolt. And we're sort of led to believe two terrible, terrible lies, especially in America. I don't know what this is like elsewhere. We have plenty of people who watch from all around, but we're told that you should always just be yourself because that's what people want you to be. And if you're just yourself, if you just be yourself, that you'll find happiness. But that's not the truth, because some people are completely unbearable in their natural state. There's some personal betterment that all of us probably need. Be a little bit of refinement, a little bit of polishing. Being yourself is not magical. It's lazy. If you're talking about being yourself as opposed to trying to be something you're not, then sure, let's have that discussion. But anyway, we're taught that the highest form of being is to be yourself. The other thing that we're taught is that you can sort of hustle your way to whatever you want in this world, and that's the so-called American dream. But there are people with so much stacked against them, not even by their own design, that you can't win. Not in that way, no matter what your hustle is. And there's always an example or two. The famous one is that the movie with Will Smith called Happiness, where he's that homeless fellow that is raising his kid basically in train station bathrooms and so on, and he's teaching himself real estate, and he becomes like a multimillionaire, and it's based on a true story. It's a terrible type of story because it sort of builds that myth further that we all can pull ourselves up by the so-called bootstraps, and it's not a reality for many, many, many of us. So what do you do? What do you do to find success as an adult? I think reinvention, at least in my case, is really the best thing. If I have to work until I'm dead, which looks more and more like the reality for my generation and the ones behind me, I want to at least be learning until I'm dead. And the idea that you become something that you chose in junior high and started working towards in high school and then became when you were 23, and then that's the thing you're going to do for 40 to 50 years. Insanity. It's absolute insanity. I mean, it's bad enough that a lot of us feel like we have to meet the love of our life before we turn 30. I can't believe that people think that they can find their life's passion at that same period of time and then stick with it, because it becomes a grind. And if you are just one of the few that decide you want to find something that pays bills and you find a job and you do that job, it's fantastic. But with the way the economy is and that sort of upward growth expected to be built into your experience, it gets harder and harder and harder, I think, to not have some sort of plan as far as your career or your vocation. So in my case, rather late in life here, I left the ministry. I was a minister for a short amount of time and left the ministry, worked as a temp worker for quite a while, a couple years, and knew that that's not how I could live my adult life. I needed to find something that I got out of bed to do because it was something I wanted to do. And at that time, I was really interested in medicine and decided that I wanted to either be a surgical tech or a pharmacist. And then I looked into it, and then I worked part-time as a pharmacy tech to get some inside intel. I just had a boldness and an ignorance that I didn't know any better. I just showed up and filled out an application, and they hired me and trained me. And before you know it, I was taking classes again and applying for pharmacy schools and getting denied and then getting accepted. And then I was a pharmacist, and then here I am again. What do I do when that profession sort of morphed and evolved in a way that I'm no longer want to be a part of? Luckily for myself, finding success has been more about the educational journey than anything else. I've learned the hard way that it's not amassing the things that you couldn't have as a child, that it's not having comic books, that hot and cold running comic books, filling in gaps and key issues as you care to because you have an adult income. That doesn't scratch the itch. Books and even having children and being married, those sorts of things are all great achievements. And I still say that my purpose on this earth is probably to be a father. And that gets more and more morbid every day as my kids continue to grow older and won't always be living under this roof. So then what do you do then? But I've learned to embrace the fact that my brain is wired in a particular way to seek out educational variety. And with my, pardon me, I had to sneeze there for those of you listening on the podcast and wonder why that went dead. I actually remembered I had a mute, so you're welcome. But for me, allowing myself to follow a variety of intellectual pursuits and not shame myself for that has been equal parts liberating and terrifying, because I continue to pay dues and start at the bottom of the ladder. And then when I change professions, change sites, I'm right down at the bottom again, and I'm not making that sort of upward mobility that I should. And we'll talk some other time about that and this sort of myth of salary progression. But what I was getting at is that I've managed to find a way to measure my success based on what I'm wired to do, what skills and gifts I was given as a biological organism that makes me different than the other 6 or 7 expressions of that same organism that I come into contact with on a regular basis. What makes me Carl Smith and not just male type? And I think it's that curiosity and that ability to learn and that absolute interest in learning and doing new things. So I hope that each one of you out there has taken some time to think about what success is for you and how to achieve that. And I hope it isn't a finish line. And some people need a finish line, and it feels great to cross a finish line, but there's so much beyond the finish line that if you're at all like me, it feels sort of empty once you hit that magical spot where you were aiming for. What then? What after that? What gets you out of bed after that? And for me, I just need to continually have a different target. And it's really helped me deal with this idea of not being a successful adult, because in a lot of ways I do feel like an absolute failure at what I'm doing. And I see people my age who are rocketing towards a comfortable retirement. We might be the last generation that possibly could have had a retirement if you did everything right. Or they have achieved a certain flexibility in their lifestyle because of their promotions through their vocations that I haven't enjoyed. I'm still training in a back room like some high schooler and starting, with no vacation and a pause on my benefits because I have to wait to hit the appropriate amount of time since hire. When I have friends in other professions that, don't even need to have ID badges anymore because everybody at their place of employment knows them. And it's interesting. But those goals for success, I think you need to define them for yourself so you don't get beat down and feel like a failure. I enjoy writing, and I really threw myself into writing, but I let myself chase a marker for success with that writing that may or may not have been even achievable, but it wasn't really a healthy success marker for me. And I've backed off a little bit because I've spent so much of my extra time doing things like setting up streams and learning how to use this technology, but also learning to code and taking online classes to kind of fill in some cracks with some IT knowledge and stuff so I can pursue a career in a different field. Hopefully it will all come back around. My biggest goals for myself right now are to find a way to utilize that education that I invested in as a pharmacist without dispensing medication. I want to find a way to utilize that to help the most people that I can. And I want to get to a part where I can afford to just have one job comfortably and not two, and not be looking for side hustles and making sacrifices. And I want to be able to be making enough extra that not only am I able to, but I feel obligated to find a way to share that resource. And I've been there before the kids were very grown. When I was a young pharmacist and, things were going pretty well with the economy and they were throwing money at us and, things were somewhat happy. This was prior to the CHI job. I felt like I was making income that sort of behooved me to find a way to utilize some of that money for benevolence. And I'm not that I didn't want to anyway, but it was an embarrassment of resource. I want to get to that place again where I have an embarrassment of resource, not only to provide for my family and to start, being a responsible adult again, but to also have that sort of flexibility that I can just reach out and try to help somebody even in the moment with that resource that they may not have access to. So those are my goals for myself. And if I can meet those goals in any way, I'll feel like a tremendous success. But I've also set little, breadcrumb goals along the way. Like I just want to get done with my next certification, or, I've applied for a job that's outside of the pharmacy domain. Really, it's an applications analyst adjacent to pharmacy, but they aren't looking for a pharmacist. They're looking for someone with IT knowledge. And I applied for that, and they requested an interview. So it's the first time I've applied for an IT job that I got through the application process and got a request for an interview based on the merits of my resume and not a recommendation from someone that's working at that location as the job I have now. I'm not going to, I interviewed well. They hit me at the peak of my interest in when I was immersing myself in IT classes. But ultimately, I think that job that I have currently came down to they needed somebody, and I had the strong recommendation of someone that worked there already. So this next interview is sort of a breadcrumb success for me. I bent their ear based on my own achievement, and it really is my own achievement. No one is driving me with a whip. No one's goading me, so to speak, to go forward with this. This is something that I've dreamt up and have developed a lesson plan and have pressed forward on my own. And will it pay off? Will it not? Will I be finally resigned to just return to pharmacy because it's always going to be there for me? Who's to say? But for now, it feels like I'm making progress in the right direction. But there's some interesting wrinkles that we'll save for another show. But I want to continue this success talk. And how I want to continue it is what happens when you do everything right and you're not a success. And I'm going to frame this in the discussion of Valiant Comics. For those of you who read comic books, you may be familiar with Valiant, regardless of what era you read, either as a teen or as an adult here recently. And we'll talk a little bit about Valiant Comics, why I bring it up at all, and what it has to do with success. I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after that break. So stick with me. Tell your friends to sign in and hear it all live before the vast left-wing conspiracy edits all my feeds and makes it sound like I'm compassionate and care about other people, like a total liberal cuck. So anyway, quick break. I'll be back after the break. All right, got to turn the mic on, I guess. That's fine. You missed me singing the praises of Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper Zero. Should I just do a commercial for it? Zero sugar. This stuff tastes just like real Dr. Pepper to the point where I don't know why they even make the sugared version of these pops anymore. They have absolutely mastered the art of decepting your taste buds. If I grab a diet Dr. Pepper now, I'm angry. Like, I'm absolutely angry because it doesn't taste right. I discovered this stuff before we went down to Branson. And when we got about halfway down, deep into Missouri, they had Diet Dr. Pepper, and that was it. Diet soda wasn't quite as well stocked in some of the gas stations we stopped in as the regular stuff. Lots of Mountain Dew, lots of Coke, but the zero sugar stuff wasn't everywhere, and it really bummed me out because it was really helping me kind of try to kick my sugar pop habit. And now I probably drink more soda than ever, even though it's all calorie free, which can't be good for you either. We'll talk about caffeine maybe on a future episode. But anyway, fueled by Dr. Pepper Zero. So, Valiant comic books. If you go to any store or junk shop or somebody's collection that was around in the 90s, you will see Valiant comics by the Scads. They were not really the third publisher, in comparison to Marvel and DC. When they came out, they were just one of many who were trying to break into this hot comic market in the 90s. They were formed almost out of bitter hate. Jim Shooter and his buddies, ran out of Marvel, and, Marvel was teetering a little bit, just preparing to lose a lot of their top talent to form Image, Dark Horse, and publishers like that were having some success being an alternative to superhero comic books, and they actually decided to start developing their own superhero lines just to compete with the hotness of the comic speculation market at that time. It was a real boom. And Valiant made pretty good comic books with really good art. And I think it was a lot of artists who felt like they weren't finding a place at Marvel at the time, because there was a lot of style over substance. And so a lot of sort of the classic visual storytelling sort of came over to Valiant. And then they had fresh characters. They had rights to some time-tested characters from Gold Key era and sort of gave them a new coat of paint, which never helps to have something that has a concept that's been tested in the field. But then all their new stuff did really well too. And they did some brilliant things with marketing that really tied them into that collector culture with special low print run issues, mail order issues you could only get if you bought Wizard magazine. The print runs were enormous. They did gimmick covers out the wazoo. Some of the best gimmick covers to this day were the Valiant Chromium cover for Exo Manowar and Ninjak. Those were fantastic gimmick covers. But they were mass produced and had a lot of buzz, but ultimately couldn't sustain the fall of the market. And their characters just didn't have that cultural anchor that a Batman or a Spider-Man has. And they limped into the 2000s, sold out to Acclaim, tried to become, an IP farm, basically, for video games, which was the next hot industry. And it didn't go well for them. And by the time they were smart enough to pull the plug and to declare bankruptcy, the rights to Valiant, sans the Gold Key, were sold, and plans started immediately to reboot it. So you will find those old Valiant comic books everywhere. The new Valiant comic books, the ones that started right around 2012, 2011, complete fresh reboot. The stuff from before doesn't really count in the continuity, which is good and bad because, it had been 20 years. They were trying to erase the stink of what it means to have boatloads of Valiant comics in your quarter bin, and to give someone a starting on spot. And plus, to their benefit, they had planned out this new universe to a T. They took those storylines, used them as a skeleton, and found a way to weave in their release schedule and their titles and their characters together into a universe that had stakes that mattered. They made sense how they related to one another. And they're one of the only publishers to this day that I've heard have stories developed, months and years ahead of time, so that they continue to have high quality creatives and a high quality product. They launched with Exo Manowar, Harbinger, Bloodshot, Ninjak eventually came. The other one, Eternal Warrior, became his own book. They brought back Quantum and Woody, Archer and Armstrong. Anybody you recognized from that old run of Valiant made a return. And they were meaningful and fun and had their own voices. And they had some of the greatest writers and artists that were working at that period of time doing books for them. They were trying to interact with the fans. They had one of the first really interactive websites that was useful as far as news, although they didn't maintain it long. It didn't really work. A lot of spin out stuff, they started getting into t-shirts and a lot of swag for comic shops. And they had people that went out and shook hands and tried to make relationships with the retailers. They tried to be very pro-retailer. They packaged the first arc of all their books into trade paperbacks in a timely fashion for a lower price. Matter of fact, I would argue probably a price at a price that they probably took a little bit of a loss that they didn't need to on them, just to introduce folks to these new IPs. And they tried a lot of different things, and they continued with all their variant cover nonsense, which wasn't an anathema to me, but for the market at the time, they were really trying to make it go to let people know this is a valid third option in the comic book space. Image had, as it would turn out, another big rise in consumer confidence yet again, based on titles like The Walking Dead and Saga. There was one about a high school, but I can't remember the name of it, where everybody are murderers. And they had just a bunch of fun titles that ran for a long time, and everybody loved the creatives that were involved with them. But so there was some real competition for that space. But when it came to unique, new, novel superhero material, no one did it better than Valiant. Matter of fact, I don't think Marvel has put together the sort of event and the meaningful crossovers and the natural bowing in or jumping in and bowing out of different series and characters with crossovers and sort of juggling multiple corners of the universe that still feel like they're occurring at a similar time and have effect on each other without everybody being in everybody else's comics. They just did an absolutely wonderful job. And from about 2012 to about 2017, I bought almost everything that they put out and put together a pretty epic collection of their hardcovers, their trade paperbacks, their floppies. I didn't get real nuts about chasing their variants. I sort of just took what I could get. And even, my LCS at the time, my true LCS, the one that's actually where I live, knew that I liked Valiant, and they believed in Valiant, but they didn't carry a lot of Valiant because guess what they didn't sell? A lot of Valiant. And they could make all the recommendations in the world. And you listen to a podcast like Two-Headed Nerd, and they always reviewed Valiant very well. Matter of fact, there was a period of time around 2014, 2015, I think, where they had the best reviewed and the most nominated books, for Eisner's for like the entire year. Really interesting that they had all that sort of industry clout, but no one was really bananas about Valiant comic books in a way that it caught fire. You could still sell Deadpool or Harley Quinn by the fistful, and you would have to almost beg someone to pick up Exo Manowar. I loved Valiant, and I loved those books. The only reason I got rid of mine is because, A, as you guys know, I famously get to self-loathing for all the clutter that I have, and B, because there was a chance for me to be a part of the Hero Initiative, and I wanted to find a way to give to them in a meaningful way. And I donated my collection, which was pretty substantial, to be auctioned off with the proceeds to go to the Hero Initiative. If you don't know what the Hero Initiative is, we'll talk about it on another podcast. If you listen to Worst Comic Podcasts Ever, that's really their shtick, and I don't want to step on their toes, but it's a very worthwhile charity that if you're a comic book fan or a sequential art fan or whatever, I think you could do a lot worse things than maybe making sure you find a way to give to Hero Initiative at least once a year. And they do all sorts of things to give you back something for your donation, but very worthwhile cause. But I wanted to find a way to be a part of that, so I donated it. They auctioned it off. They got some money. Everybody won. But here, years later, I want to read those books again. I don't regret giving them the books, but I have 0 Valiant books. And so I jumped into the world of, I wonder how hard it would be to rebuild a small library of Valiant that I want to read. Some of it's available digital, but I've never converted over to digital reading. I think it's awkward, and I never have really had a device that's comfortable. Their trade or their hardcover books bring a pretty penny because they weren't published in a great amount. Matter of fact, I pre-ordered almost all of mine through Legend, and they were happy to order them for me. But I got them all as they came out, and they came out slower and slower to the point where you never really knew if you were going to get like the full run of anything because it was always up in the air of whether or not they would even continue doing the hardcovers. The hardcovers were fun because they did hardcovers for their events that also brought in all the tie-in issues and put them in the chronological order. And unlike, let's say, Fall of the Mutants or something like that, it actually felt meaningful to get all that other material in context. And just, again, they did everything right. So I get looking at these comic books again, and maybe I could track down the trade paperbacks. You can find them pretty cheap, but not a complete run always. And again, not everything probably had a full run or is any longer in print. Valiant comic books in the year 2022 finally succumbed to this issue that they were having. And that issue is cash flow. The cash flow was not reflecting the sort of hype that a revamped DC or a revamped Marvel or a Marvel when MCU was hot was seeing. The high water didn't float all boats. Valiant continued to struggle. It didn't help that they sold. They really wanted to get into the movie business and were working with Sony. They were bought by an investment group that some call it a Chinese investment group, but I think that while it had its roots in China, that some of the investors that are heavies are stateside. But it became, which it had in the past, A, an IP farm, and B, under new leadership, corporate leadership. And the people who were steering the boat and did such a good job as fans making sure that everything was being done correctly, were shown the door. And Valiant, all the fun things about Valiant, like the weird bootleg Archer and Armstrong books that would just show up mailed unsolicited to comic shops, or the pull box only covers. You could only get those as a subscription, or books that you could only get because your retailer was getting them based on incentive ratios, Tales of the Geomancer. And so every shop was only getting a few copies, if that, kind of to drive sales of the Book of Death, which was the event at that time that, they were really making a mad push to get some people looking at how high quality their comics were. And so they did those fun little incentive things where there's this 4-issue series that is much like Big Idea is now, that it will never be reprinted. It will never be included in collected editions. And there was such a low print run, and it was so contingent on ordering at those shops that there's not a lot of copies floating around. It's good, and I enjoyed it, but nothing much happens in it that's significant by design, because you don't want to rip off 90% of your fan base by saying so sorry. It hadn't quite got the formula right for how to do a stunt like that and give you a quality product that also doesn't like betray people who are still buying a lot of comics from you. So, but anyway. So they finally succumbed to all those pressures and mismanagement and the change in mission statement, and now they're only publishing one comic a month. There's a limited series that's still struggling to finish that started over a year ago. It should be done by now. They kind of just snuck out issues of a Bloodshot series, but they had hoped, I'm sure, to been a blockbuster because of the movie with Vin Diesel, but that came out during COVID, and plus it's a Vin Diesel action movie, so it just, I don't think, ever quite panned out the way that this small little publisher hoped it would. Now they're looking to reboot X-O Manowar for, I think, the 4th or 5th time since the 2012. And it's not truly a reboot, but a lot of their stuff feels really rebooty since the change of the guard. So it'll be interesting to see what context they put XO in. But it's supposed to be out in March, and I've seen a lot of people sort of doubtful that it will even come to fruition. And it almost feels a lot like a Hail Mary, like they're really banking on XO and Free Comic Book Day with a teaser book they have coming out to kind of rekindle the flame. But I hope they do, but it doesn't seem like it's in the cards for them. Valiant did everything absolutely right and didn't succeed. You will never put together a comic book universe with superheroes in it in an industry the way that it is now, with powerhouses like Warner and Disney at both ends, that is as tight and compelling and high quality as the 2012 Valiant lineup was. And the sad thing is that absolutely no one cares. There is a dedicated fan base. And then beyond that, it is crickets, or people who vaguely remember really enjoying something they read from Valiant at one time. A reflection of that is the fact that as much as they pandered to the collectible market, collectors don't really respect Valiant comics either. If you look at your supplier of choice, and I don't want to out all my sources, even though it's obvious where I'm getting my stuff, because I'm still trying to put together a collection myself, but 90% is a conservative estimate, it may be higher, of their entire output since 2012 can be had in floppy form in one variant cover or another for $2 an issue. Half of cover. It's bananas. And you can put together a pretty impressive library of Valiant comics for relatively cheap. And that's what I've started doing. I bought quite a few at very low prices, some lots off of eBay and what have you, to get started rereading them again. And there's a few more that I would like to get before I really get diving in, just for the chronological aspect of the whole thing. But it's a rabbit hole you can go down and become obsessed with and not have any regrets for the quality for very little outlay. I imagine these books are probably in dollar boxes at your local cons or comic shops. I myself need to probably head over to my LCS and see if I can take advantage of my 50% off back issues and score some. But I have a strike price of around $2 or $2.50. If you see one that's marked up higher than that, that you can't get cheaper, then you know it's particularly low print run. But there are no key issues. Nothing has been marked key. Nothing has artificial value. There are covers that are 1 in 20, 1 in 50 retailer incentives that you can also have for undercover price. There just isn't any value there for someone who's doing anything other than reading them, which should bring me joy, but I think it's a symptom of a problem that their success was denied to them, regardless of the fact they did everything right. Now, they did a bunch of goofy stuff. They got involved early with digital trading cards on 2 different platforms. And then since the flip flop of guidance, they've really gone hard into NFTs. They've goofed around with some of the characters. People were really upset that they rode Faith as hard as they did into the ground, although I don't see it that way. I think she was a good character and a unique character. And they were trying to, yet again, find another corner of fandom and their universe that they could tell stories without everything being big macho guys blowing away bad guys. So, but they turned off some of the neck beards that were hanging on. They followed that up by promoting Shockwave, who is a woman of color, and which further alienated that same weird group of males. And then when they switched management, their editor in chief and then her assistants or their assistants, I'm not sure what her pronouns are, their pronouns are, but were people that people already had a problem with from Marvel for daring to try to make comics inclusive and progressive. And so then there was a lot of allegations of the whole woke thing going on. And it didn't help that there was tonal changes midway through a few of their series. Again, I think because they're trying to polish things to be packaged for IP sales. There were a few new series that started. A lot of the characters were gleaned from the prior Valiant volumes, but kind of given new life, and they're kind of embarrassing and feel awkward in the universe. None of them are bad. I really haven't read a lot of bad comics from Valiant, but they're not great, and most of their stuff is great. So in comparison, it seems like they're missteps. So how frustrating is it that there's this thing that exists that was done exactly the right way, and there's so many people who dream of starting a comic book series or a comic book company to rival someone like a Marvel and to do it right. That happens in any industry, entertainment industry. Someone wants to, I want to do this, but I want to do it the right way. They did it the right way, and it didn't work. Whether it be by luck or timing or just misreading the market, maybe we just want spoon-fed the same garbage. And maybe part of the fun for us with a Spider-Man is having a Dan Slott to kick around when he dares make any changes. Maybe we don't want new. We don't want different. And that's very disappointing to me. The idea that I would have been thrilled over the moon to been involved with writing for Valiant comic books in that heyday, and felt like I had made it. But ultimately to have done it for a company that didn't make it, that didn't do well, that only did so well. And they didn't even like fly too close to the sun, although they made a lot of weird choices with their priorities with the movies and everything else. But they didn't really, put all their eggs in one basket and then go for broke and then lose. It just was like this constant, let's just throw everything against the wall until something sticks mentality with everything around the comic books. And no one paid attention. And I don't know if it's they didn't take it serious or, like I said, they just don't want it. But those comic books hold up, and I can sit and read them. That first arc of Harbinger that leads into the Harbinger Wars with Bloodshot is some of the greatest development of characters and plot. And it's kind of goofy, pending apocalypse, teenage reluctant heroes type stuff, but it's done well, and it really sticks to landing. And this isn't Mark Waid writing it. This is a lot of people with input working as a committee to make sure they put out the best unified product possible. And dare I say, it's socialist comic book making. They wanted to make sure that product was the best for the people. And they put aside a lot of egos to make sure that everything fit. And there was a lot of freedom to create within that system. And we got things like Divinity, which was their cosmic arm. That it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful as a standalone. Rye, they have a whole mythology that happens at 4,000 years, 4001 AD. And Rye is at the center of that. And his comics are some of the best science fiction comics ever made in the West at all. And, hardly any attention paid to them, and except for when someone reads it and they're immediately gobsmacked by how wonderful it is. And then they put it away. And again, it just doesn't catch fire like it deserves to. So dealing with success in a platform like that, where you do everything right, you actually sort of nail what you're heading for, and just to be met with crickets is got to be one of the most frustrating things in the world. And I think in our personal lives, maybe we have that similar problem. I think a lot of times we do the right thing and it just doesn't work out. We have the wife, the family, the kids, the car, the 9 to 5. We don't call off sick. We fortunate enough to not fall prey to some of our worst demons like alcoholism or, what have you. And you just do things the right way, but success eludes you and you wonder why. Why wasn't I more of a success? I did things the right way. We paid our bills on time. We went to college. We were wise with our spending. Made sure we went to church every Sunday. And there isn't really an answer. And that's the best I can come up with. As a former minister, I could give you some big spiel about, how, this is the way life is now, but life afterwards is different. This is all just a test, not to take it too serious. And some people are given different challenges and blah, blah, blah. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really help you answer the big question of why me? Why did I do things the right way and not find success? And that's one of the more hard conversations to have with yourself. And it's one of those things you can let fester, and it affects your relationship with others. It affects your effectiveness as a human being. It makes you second guess yourself. It makes you bitter. It makes you hard-hearted. And I would encourage you to not let success eluding you affect who you are. Just redefine your success, as we talked about earlier. Do something that has easier to obtain breadcrumbs, and not worry too much about your legacy. Just worry about what you can control at the time at which you can control it. Most of us do the thing that we think is best at any given time, but through the grace of aging and experience, we get better at dealing with things appropriately. We should be. And that in itself is a success. So, again, I'm not suggesting that we all find a way to give ourselves participation ribbons, But I think redefining success before the big successes elude us and we beat ourselves up too much is a crucial part of adulthood, because things cease to be fun as you get older. I've had this conversation with 3 of my good friends in the last week alone, and it's a thing that comes up constantly, is that we're in this phase of life where we're losing people we love, we're becoming less healthy, finances get stretched thinner instead of becoming more solid, and it's just this part of life that no one talks about, and it's not going to get easier from here on out. And so you can be crushed by that, crushed by the loss of family and friends and the change of status quo with children growing up and dealing with massive changes in society that you're not accustomed to or care for in the case of American politics. But you can let that crush you, or you can find a way to let it wash around you and focus on something else. And I think that's crucial. And I don't have a specific answer for all of you, but it's a discussion I think it's good to have. And it's good to have between a bunch of 40-year-old nerds. Is that, are you a success? Do you feel like a failure? Why do you feel like a failure? What did you write down on your journal as your goal for success? And is it something that we can alter? Maybe life, much like Valiant Comics, has let you down. It's the market who is wrong, not you. You are going to stand a test of time. You are objectively successful in the way you approached and actioned your life, regardless of the feedback you're getting back from those around you, the world around you, your bank, your boss, whatever. So how do we find a way to fill you up from the inside out with a feeling of contentment for your own personal success? And I think the key to that is defining your successes, setting more reasonable goals, and, to be honest, patting each other on the back. I'm so proud of my friends who have struggled with things and overcome them, whether it been health or self-inflicted things or things that were done to them relationship-wise or vocationally, people who have identified flaws within themselves and fought to overcome them. I have 3 friends right now who are in their eternal struggle with alcoholism, and they're all doing very well. And I think about them often, and when I get the chance, I like to tell them so, not to embarrass them or not to remind them that we're all aware of their dirty little secret, but to let them know I'm very proud. I'm very proud of their success. And it is a success. And that success is just moving forward to the next day and being a better you and as good of a you as you can be. So let's pat each other on the back. Let's give each other hugs. Let's say I love you. And let's acknowledge each other's successes. And in our quiet moments, in our introspective moments, let's help each other identify where we're at in regards of adult success and alleviate some of that pressure to perform that so many of us feel. All right, that should wrap it up for this week. Until next Wednesday at 8:30, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and if you have any comments, any suggestions, any discussions, you know where to find me online. You can find me on Twitter still, at Carl Smith Writer. You can find me here on the Twitch, and I might be playing games, I might be talking, but for the next 10 days, I'm going to be watching sumo. And yeah, man, take it easy yourself, man. I'm glad to hook up with all you guys on here. It's been a blast, kind of building this small audience, even those that don't watch it live. I'm very content with the handful of dudes I know that are willing to listen and talk about these topics, in the same breath as video games, comic books, pro wrestling. I think it's important that we acknowledge that there's other aspect of life, and your guys' friendship is definitely an aspect of life that I want to continue to celebrate. So, until next time, everybody take care, and Again, find a way to do the best and most good you can do tomorrow when you get out of bed. Look at the world around you and say, where can I improve myself and where can I help others in need? See ya.